So I want to talk today about walking in your purpose and what God has laid out and planned for your life. I saw this quote just a couple of days ago that really made me stop and think. Like, it's so simple, but such a meaningful phrase. And it said, somewhere, somebody is depending on you to do what God has called you to do. And I don't know that I've ever gotten up and approached the day in that manner before reading that. I don't know that I think about it very often, what I do, how I do it, and the fact that God has, in fact, called me, called Sally, called Kank to do this. It's been a really long and strange road for me, for sure. When I first got into radio, I wanted nothing to do with God. I worked for top 40 stations all across the country. Kind of climbed my way up the ladder, and I'll be very honest, I was after two things: notoriety in the industry and money. Like, those were my goals when it came to what I did. And I very distinctly remember the day that God got hold of me, and he was like, this is not what you're supposed to do. You need to walk away from this because I have other plans for you. And so 8 months later, I was working for a Christian radio station. Nobody knew me on the Christian radio side of things, and there was definitely not a lot of money involved. It was a step, I'm going to be honest, it was a step backwards financially, as a matter of fact. And I remember being really disappointed because, yes, I was playing these amazing songs from really awesome artists. I shared much more uplifting things, but there was something kind of missing, and I didn't feel like I was making a whole lot of difference. It was kind of the same in a lot of ways. Now, at this point, I will say I was extremely tight-lipped about my struggles with mental illness, because for one thing, usually in a place of work, you don't want to broadcast that you have those kinds of problems. And anybody who has battled depression or bipolar disorder or anxiety, all things that I struggle with, or anything else, the stigma that is still there, and the comments that can be made, and the judgments that can kind of befall you when you open up about it. But I remember distinctly, there was one day at work, I was battling. I could barely not cry every time I opened my mouth to speak. And I couldn't have told you what was wrong. I hurt. Life hurt in that moment. And on a bit of a whim, I said something on the air about what a hard day it was, how my depression was really bubbling over that day. And I remember saying, but I know, even on days like this, God is good. I don't understand why I go through what I go through. You may not understand what you go through, but we know whose hands we're in, and that's where our comfort is in these moments. And the second I turned the mic off, this lady called, just bawling her eyes out, and she said, thank you. I can't tell you how much I needed to hear that. I needed to know I'm not alone. And so we talked a while, and I prayed with her. And from that day forward, I began dealing out pieces of my story as it was unfolding. The ups, the downs, the illness, the healing, the relapse, the defeats, the victories, and the hope. And it's just as scary every time I talk about it as it was the first time. I'm not going to lie. But the encouragement that I received, the thank yous, the, oh my goodness, I'm there, or I've been there, or let me tell you what God did for me, all of those exchanges, it just reaffirmed to me that no struggle is without purpose. And even though it took me a long time and I had some very skewed priorities for the first half of my career, it turns out this right here is where I was supposed to be all along. And this is what I was supposed to be doing. And it is my hope and my prayer every day that the calling God has placed on my life, can bless just one person. That'd be great. And I mean, the same is true of you. God has a calling on your life too, and somebody is depending on you to walk in that purpose this very minute. 1 Peter 4:10, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So just live boldly, seek God in everything you do everything to his glory, and walk in that confidence that you're right where he's placed you for a time such as this.
Yeah, I love that. I also love, Misty, is you took what was considered a weakness and a faux pas of something not to talk about, and what it did was you're right. If it's true that God has a calling for you today, or someone is depending on you today, I think that it also shows how much being real and sharing a hurt or sharing whatever you're going through ministers to others, because we have that feeling like we're the only one that's dealing with it. And what you just did was made that instant relationship with them. And so maybe that, also encourages you, if you're watching this, maybe you're going through a struggle, share it. Why not?
Yeah.
You know, so much of our lives is about being, hiding behind the mask that we put up. I'm fine. You know, I'm fine. I'm fine. Think about how often we say that to each other when we're out. How are you doing? And the instant response is, I'm fine. How are you? You know, and it all kind of amounts to very little. But Mysti, the gift that you've given in sharing the real struggles is you've opened it up to all of us to not be perfect, because nobody can. Mm-hmm. And so when we're striving, and that's our goal, is to keep the mask up, it's exhausting, it's defeating, and it hampers us, it stops us from doing what God has called us to do, which is right where you started this talk. And so it's a blessing to have you on our team, and I know that you're a blessing to our listening family.
Amen.
And they can see why we chose you. And we're so grateful. Yeah. So thank you from the big crowd.
Well, thank you for letting me share my story. And, you know, as long as God has given me breath and a voice, I'll keep doing that.
Amen.
Amen. Good stuff.